Hello, fellow pushers. This is Grant Lindenberg coming at you with another episode of Pushing Cardboard. This is episode 20, Roger Miller and Storm over Arnhem. Well, at least that's what I'm calling it. My podcast host is offering a new service where they have an AI thing offering titles and things like that. So who knows what it's going to suggest I title this episode, but for me, it's episode 20, Roger Miller and Storm over Arnhem. Episode 20, that's a bit of a mini milestone. These 20 episodes and the YouTube content and the web content, it's all starting to it's starting to add up to something. It feels good. Spring is here. COVID is back. My Flames are out of the playoffs. Wildfires are burning my province up. It all adds up to us needing some wargaming as a distraction, and I've got you covered. First up, fresh from my recent trip to GMT West, I have an interview with Roger Miller, one of the co-owners of Revolution Games. It's an interesting chat, as we hear a lot of interviews with designers, but Roger is a publisher as well as a designer and gamer. He shares a lot about what it's like to be a publisher of war games. And I know some of you are hankering for a dive into a game since we missed it last time. So this episode, I'll talk about Storm over Arnhem, the original Area Impulse game. Thanks for the feedback on last episode. Obviously, there's a lot of interest in Jerry White and his innovative designs. Jerry's a thoughtful and empathetic designer. I'm lucky to have had the chance to speak with him. And that episode has set records for me for the most downloads in the first 7 days and the first downloads, the most downloads in the first 30 days. So obviously a very popular interview. Thanks a lot. Okay, news and what I've been playing. In terms of news, GMT and Compass keep releasing and announcing new games faster than I can keep track. Skimming through their press releases, GMT announced a digital version of Twilight Struggle Red Sea. It's on Steam. As well, they announced a few new P500 items. Here's a few that caught my eye. Spearhead, the balloon goes up. This is a hypothetical game series set in 1968 to the present, so it'll be of interest to all the Cold War Gone Hot fans. The scale looks to be battalions up to divisions. Twilight Struggle, South Asian Typhoon, looks to be another in the series of the same scale as Red Sea, sort of smaller intro Twilight Struggle games. The Guerrilla Generation, Cold War Insurgencies in Latin America, is another coin multi-pack in the style of the British Way that was recently released. And then Resisting Revolution is an expansion for Cuba Libre that picks up where the original left off. I think that's how it works. In addition, on the Compass's pre-order section is Desert Victory. I'm a sucker for World War II North Africa games, so they'll probably grab me with that one. Revolution Games reports that Stalingrad Advance to the Volga 1942 is their fastest selling game ever. It's a solitaire game, so while I'm happy for Revolution and for designer Mike Ranella, but it's a sad day when solitaire designs are the best sellers. Lock and Load has just released Heroes of the Bitter Harvest, their latest game in their World War II tactical series. It's one of the few tactical systems I haven't played yet, so I'm going to give it a try. Well, that is once I finish exploring Point Blank V is for Victory, their card-based World War II tactical game that I also have a copy of. What's on the table? Well, still lots of virtual ASL via Vassal. Conversely, this is probably the first time in 5 years that I haven't got a game of Commands and Colors Ancients going via PBM. My world feels a bit unhinged. I'll have to rectify that. I've been playing Revolution's upcoming World War I game, Eagles in the Sky. I plan to release a playthrough video of that in the next few weeks. And I've also been playing Point Blank V is for Victory, a solo so far. I hope to have an interview with designer Sean Drulinger in an upcoming episode. I'm a huge Upfront fan, and while there's been many World War II card games over the years, none has matched it. So I'm eager to see if maybe Point Blank V for Victory will be it. Via Vassal PBEM, I'm still playing Storm over Arnhem, Absolute Victory, Combat Commander, Commands and Colors Napoleon, A most fearful sacrifice and a greater victory. Oh, and Undaunted Normandy continues and just keeps getting better and better. Oh, and also, the Alive Vassal. I had to go at a playtest of Henry. We're about halfway through. It's an upcoming entry-level Levian campaign game. Well, it is fairly entry-level. The English side has a completely different levy system from the other games in the series, so I'm not sure if it's going to be a perfect entry into the Levian campaign system or not. Though, what is? It's sort of a strange series to wrap your head around when you're just learning it. I also soloed some more 1812 War on the Great Lakes Frontier from Compass. I really want to play this one for real, see how it goes. It's a very different looking game than any other 1812 game I have. Okay, new games in the collection. Well, this is a first for me. I bought almost nothing since last time. The only thing that's come in was I had pre-orders of MMP's GTS magazine, Briefings Volume 1, and the latest ASL Annual, and the latest issue of War Diary. So they all came, and the only thing I went out and bought was an ATO game, Birth of a Legend. It's another, I think it's another Mike, contains another Mike Ranella American Civil War area impulse game, and I'm enjoying my not war but murder game at the moment, so I decided to try another one of those. But that's not bad. One game I bought, a few others came in from pre-orders, so really a red letter month for me in my wallet. Books. I can't not mention that I finally finished the third volume of Ian Toll's Pacific Trilogy, Twilight of the Gods. Like the first two volumes, this was imminently readable, and I'm starting to feel like I finally have more of a handle on the Pacific campaign. I read another overview of the Pacific. I wish you could remember the title. Its main feature was it was completely from the Japanese point of view. So between the two, I feel like I've really done a decent dive into the theater. And I read a good biography of MacArthur that slagged him fairly appropriately, so that felt good as well. Okay. Let's move right on to the main event, my discussion with Roger Miller. Along with his partner, Richard Helston, Roger is one half of Revolution Games. He's got a long history in wargaming, going back to submitting his first design idea to SBI when he was just 18 years old. But what's more interesting about our conversation is talking to Roger about publishing. We hear a lot of interviews with designers, but not so many with publishers. So it's great to hear a bit about how the sausage gets made. Here it is. Hello. I'm here with Roger Miller from Revolution Games. How are you, Roger?
Good.
And we're here at GMT West, the spring weekend at the warehouse. I first met Roger last time I was here in the fall when you were demoing what was then a new game, the Death of an Army, and now you got a new one here. But before we get into all that, do you get to a lot of conventions? Are you?
Usually 3 or 4 here.
Right, in here for sure, because you live near here.
GMT usually both times a year. Herald San Diego convention, sometimes Pacificon over in Santa Clara.
Right.
Constant World Expo in Tempe.
And you right now you're based in Sacramento, and are you a longtime Californian, or is this where you're from? Or
born in California, lived in Sacramento since 1980.
Right, so you're solidly in there. Yeah. I hear you. When you go to the convention circuit, is it always to playtest and promote your products, or do you get any playing in as well?
Probably about 1/3 playing, and the other 2/3 company work.
Right. Whether it's promo or playtest or whatever, or I guess making connections too with.
Connections are also important. So yeah.
If you well, we look like we're about the same age. We do get grown up playing games. Were you like an SPI guy or a Avalon Hill guy?
I got my first game in 1975, and it was 1776 by Avalon Hill.
Yeah.
And then my second game was Oil War by SBI. And so I had a fair collection of both. I liked SBI a little better than Avalon Hill. probably because they had a higher output, and I was a voracious
Yeah.
devourer of new games. So, but I had both.
Right.
And GDW, Victory.
Yeah, once it started
everybody
rolling
else
out.
has more stuff came out.
In those early days, it just felt like it was the two of them, and then it sort of feels like that again now. It's like that there's a proliferation of
Very much so.
of publishers, like yourself included with Revolution. Well, I don't want to ask you. We already know what your first war game, but what was the first war game you played that like you just couldn't quit playing? That it was like the one that put its hooks in you and you were in the hobby for good.
Wow. I'm not one of those persons who has just a few games they really like. I like a lot of games.
I hear you.
And a lot of different styles of games and sizes of games. So, if I were going to say the game I probably spent the most time on early on, it'd be War Between the States.
Oh, great.
SPI's big Civil War game.
Yeah,
But I mean,
yeah.
I was playing a lot of other stuff at the same time.
Right.
But
you were already hooked, and that was just
Yeah.
the biggest.
yeah,
the biggest
I
one.
was hooked, and within a year of starting playing, I was designing games.
Right.
I mean, it was almost instantaneous.
Right. I've heard that from other designers too, where it's like it's something they didn't even know was in them, and then they see a game, and it's like, well, how could I do this? Or how could I make this better? Or how could I take this idea and set it in this genre? Right. It's like you had a. You told me, or I heard you say yesterday that you tried designing games like right back in the mid '70s, like.
Yeah, I designed my first games and submitted my first games to publishers when I was 18.
Right.
In 1979.
Right.
And so I got my first rejections right then, up early.
Right. And when was it? When did you first publish a game then, or was it yourself or through someone else?
So after I tried the traditional publishers and didn't get anything, I decided to make my game even less sellable and more the way I wanted to make it. And I self-published then in '92
Right.
for the first time.
And did you call yourself Revolution Games at that time, or?
No, the first game is Buena Vista, and it was by Fifth Column Games, which the name has been reused now by an English company.
Right.
So there's no relation between them. But the Fifth Column Games, Buena Vista, was my first product,
And that was 1992.
and that was 1992.
And then, we'll get ahead. Going back to that period, or talking about you like a whole lot of games. Do you have a favorite designer that besides yourself? Is there? Well, nobody's favorite is themselves.
We're too critical of ourselves.
Yeah,
Never,
exactly.
Never.
I've never heard it.
No, I liked a lot of designers. I particularly back in the day liked Al Nofi
Yeah.
for SPI,
Yeah.
Joe Belkowski.
Right.
I liked their stuff, but I liked a lot. I liked a lot of people's stuff. I didn't think about it so much as designer. A lot of times, you could ask me, and I wouldn't even be able to tell you who the designer was.
Especially then.
And so,
You find out later that you had favorites.
And then you find out, oh, this guy designed that and that and that, and then you put the link together.
Yeah.
But I've never had a favorite designer. I've never had a favorite company.
Right.
I was pretty broad on both.
Yeah, I've always been the same way. I started out on Avalon Hill, but once the world opened up to me, then it was just like, what's out there? It seemed I think I saw Joe Balkowski selling off a lot of his collection of his games, his original copies that were still in shrink. It seems like maybe he's kind of getting out of gaming and just sticking with the writing and the museum that he's a part of, I think.
That's been what he's been doing for quite a few years now. That's where
Right.
he's most of his.
Right. He
stuff
did work on the remake of Korea.
Yeah.
And that's probably the last thing he did. I meet a lot of people who he's in their like top 3 designers for sure.
That game, the Korean Wars, would be in my top 5 games
Right.
of all time.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that would be.
Yeah, that's one where I still have the Victory Games version of it, and it's
I have 2 Victory Games versions, and they're both totally worn out.
Right.
The counters are ratty, the charts are terrible. And so I do have a copy of the
new one.
But
Yeah.
I haven't broken it out and played the new one yet.
Right. Well, that's cool. Do you, when you get time to play, do you still play any older games, or are you constantly kind of looking at what's new and what's happening?
Real old games, very, very rare. I mean, if we're talking 70s and 80s, 90s, almost never.
Right.
But being a publisher, you're always so busy with your own stuff that there's plenty of stuff from the last 20 years that I haven't tried.
Right.
And so, like, we have the different sets of Combat Commander. And I've played like 3 scenarios of Combat Commander in the last 20 years.
Right, so you've got a lot of scenarios to go through.
So Richard and I started playing like, more regularly. And we've played probably 20 scenarios of Combat Commander now.
Right.
None of it new, all from Combat Commander Europe.
Right, yeah.
And so,
but it's all great.
But it's all new to us.
Yeah.
So we do go back and play some older games, but they're oftentimes new to us because we've just never got to them.
Sure, and there's so much coming out all the time. It used to be, you felt like you could kind of keep on top of the hobby, but those days are gone.
There's 150 to 200 serious war games produced a year.
Yeah.
And
when people say the hobby's dying, it's like...
I tell people that and they can't believe me, and I go, probably because you're only looking at the United States. You're not looking at companies in Poland, companies in Germany, Italy, France,
Spain,
Japan.
Japan's huge.
So
yeah.
If you cover the whole world, there's a lot of design being done all over the place.
And I've found the shipping from Europe is often not too bad if there's something that you really got your heart set on, and it's and you've heard good things about it. It's like, check it out, order it up.
No.
It's not bad.
Absolutely.
I still play like a few games from the 80s, like every once in a while we'll still play Upfront, for example, and stuff like that, but it does feel more, it's that balance between constantly getting new stuff over that's shrinking my wallet and pulling the old stuff off the shelf. But I think there's some games that still hold up, right? It's like,
yeah, I don't know where I don't know when the Korean War was published, somewhere in the 86, I think.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
So yeah, I've played it recently. I've played Empires in Arms, also from that era, relatively recently. So yeah, there's an occasional game from that era that still hits the table, but it's...
People who are Empires in Arms fans, like people either are or they aren't, and those who are, like, they love that game.
Yeah, we played it a lot over the years.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Is there, when you get a chance to play, is there do you have a favorite type of game? I know you got pretty wide tastes, but some people don't like tactical, or they don't like CDGs or whatever.
I'm a little less fond of CDGs. I play them, but I'm a little less fond of them, and I'm a little less fond of tactical games. So I don't play a lot of tactical games, and I don't play a lot of card-driven games. But again, it's not something that I can say, oh, I just don't play those, because I have played quite a few of them.
Right. They're lower on your...
They're just lower.
Given your choice, you'd rather play an operational or a battle game, or...
Right.
Yeah. You're here this weekend with your company, and you've got the latest Blind Swords game that's playtesting, the one on Shiloh. How's that going?
It's going really well. It's actually, again, I guess latest would mean...
the latest in development, I guess.
It's really hard to say when you're working on multiple games
right.
what it is. So we've got number 8, Grand Havoc, which is the Battle of Perryville.
Right.
It's in production now and about to be shipped to us.
Right.
Then there's Chickasaw Bayou and Salem Church, which are both in development, and they will be games 9 and 10.
Oh, I didn't even know those two.
And then Shiloh will be game 11, and then there's an Antietam game that I don't know what its pace is, because the designer is, he did the first Bull Run, and it took him like 3 or 4 years.
Right.
So I don't even have it slotted into a...
How many designers do you have working on the Blind Sword series now, then?
Five.
Wow.
I had to count.
Yeah.
Five.
Well, I mean, it's my favorite series that you guys publish, and I'm happy to know that it's got that sort of support. Obviously, they're selling.
They sell very well.
Yeah. And I saw I've seen the one you're working on, Shiloh. It's like double the size of.
Yeah, we haven't done one before with 2 maps.
Right.
So this has 2 maps. It's going to have the counter mix is a little bigger, but it's not a lot bigger.
That's one of the nice things about blind swords is they're not the counter density isn't huge.
Yeah, this will be 2 sheets of the units and 1 sheet of markers. So it'll be three counter sheets, 2 maps. We may produce some other maps for scenarios, because we're planning 7 scenarios for the battle.
Ah.
And so we're already talking. We were trying to talk today about layout and how we would do that, but it's still really too early for us to finalize layout. And somebody asked me today how big the box is going to be. And I mean, it's way too early. This is going to be sometime probably April through August of next year when this one comes out.
Right.
So it's a way.
It's still in playtesting.
It's in early playtesting right now. But
right.
Because it's a series, early playtesting for one of these battles is a lot farther along than early playtesting would be of a totally new game.
Right. You're not playtesting the system. You're
Right.
playtesting a new scenario and some new exclusive rules for the situation.
Absolutely.
And what's the exciting thing about Shiloh that makes it different than the other games?
Well, first thing, Shiloh is basically a surprise attack. So that makes it similar to the Wilson's Creek, Thunder at Dawn. The other thing that's different about Shiloh was the armies are so green.
Right.
So the armies they aren't very cohesive. They've got low cohesions.
Right.
We've got some special rules for, they're more difficult to rally and put back together. Blind Swords always has some of that limiting more than some other games, but this is really going to be that way.
Yeah, some of the counters like the 10 strength but a 2 cohesion.
Yeah, there's 2s and 1s out there, and there are rules about if all the units in a brigade get a morale hit or a loss, then they become wrecked and they can't be rallied. So there's going to be a lot more.
So brigades just, if things go south for a brigade, they just...
Well, what happens is they can't be. So normally in Blind Swords, you have the ability through rally chits and orders to slowly bring back beaten up troops.
Rallies and rebuilds.
Exactly. It's slow, but you can do it.
Yeah.
However, in Shiloh, if you have a brigade too beat up, it reaches a certain wrecked status, and it can't be recovered.
Right.
So at that point, it's never going to get any better.
You can still use it, but it's
garbage.
It's garbage. Yeah.
And you're likely just to keep, taking losses.
Yeah. Well, no, it's all good. The other thing I saw was there's a lot of there's a lot of rules about surprise and that the early moments when the Confederates come across the completely surprised Union troops, right? It's like
and we're trying to keep those, and that's one of the tricky parts is we're trying to keep that to a minimum. We want the rules, you want the battle to get off to a start that's halfway reflects the situation, but you don't want so many rules that it's difficult for the players to remember them. And we don't want it so many rules so the player feels that it can only go in the historical.
Right.
The exact historical pattern.
No.
So it's always a balance between those two. I know some people hate games that have any scripting at all. I'm not that way. If it was a surprise attack, I feel a bit of it is appropriate. I don't want a Pearl Harbor where the American bombers are bombing the Japanese carriers. But on the other hand, do I want it exactly like historical? No. So in between.
It's basically you want to have a place to start from that's real and then see where it goes.
Start with including the conditions and the mindset of that. So there's going to be effects for the first few turns, but not carried very long through the battle. I mean, we're talking about the first hour.
Right, which is 2 turns in this system.
These are 30-minute turns, and we're skipping the first couple hours of where the Confederates were marching on and skirmishing with a few Union outposts. We didn't want this to be a road march game.
Right. That's got to be a challenge for the designer, right? Where exactly are we going to start?
Absolutely. So we're cutting the game, starting a little bit later than some other Shiloh games, which makes it a little quicker to start, but eliminates some of the more unusual Confederate strategies of deep outflanks that they historically didn't use. So again, it's in between. So some people would say, oh, you're limiting the Confederate attack some. Yes, we are. And we are also starting it, at 8 a.m. rather than 6 a.m. So it's a little tighter. And one of our aims as Revolution Games is to make our games a bit on the tighter side.
Right.
And sometimes that means editing out stuff at the beginning or the end that had little or no effect to keep the play length and the turns down to a reasonable length. Or in extreme case, Longstreet attacks, where we're only showing a portion of the Battle of Gettysburg.
And that's a bit with what's happening with Shiloh too, right? You're doing the first day of Shiloh where...
We're doing the first day of Shiloh for certain. We're debating the second day, but the second day was really, if the Confederates don't take the landing on day 1, and Buell can bring his army across on day 2, it's really no battle. There's so many fresh Union troops that it's...
Right, so the battle it's decided one way or the other on the first day.
In my opinion, I did put the second day of Pea Ridge and Thunder in the Ozarks, but then I get people saying, well, I played it, but it's no fun. And when I say, I warned you of that. So we're still debating because it's a trade-off. We don't think it's a very good game situation the second day at Shiloh, but there are other people who will say, hey, but I wanted the complete game.
Is there any thought to doing the first day as you first thought and then publishing the second day just as a scenario?
That's what the designer wants to do.
Oh, okay. I haven't talked to Steve. I hadn't.
That's what he wants to do. I don't think I'll probably do that. But
that's not been part of the Revolution Games business model so far.
No. We're not big on add-ons. We're not big on designer signature or deluxe editions. It's pretty much we produce the game the way we want it the first time, and many of our games have been reprinted and nobody even knows it because there's no pre-order model and there's no publicity given, and there may be very subtle changes, a few erratas incorporated or something else, but we don't take it as an opportunity to
try and convince people to rebuy.
I'm trying to politely say that's it, but yes, I hate that concept of rebuy the same game.
Well, and you're a smaller company, but you're part of your lean business model also has to do with an old school model where you actually keep inventory on hand.
Yes.
There's not this constant bring it down to zero, make people wait, then reprint, and have a big amount of time in between.
Almost every Revolution game that we ever published is available. Only 3 of them have gone out of print. And those the 3 smallest games were produced in a different fashion at a different printer and die cutter.
Right.
And they both went out of business. One of them died and the other business perished in COVID. And so
if you were going to reprint those, you'd have to do a whole reproduction.
They would essentially be a new game.
Right. Yeah.
And we looked at those little games and said, we don't think it's worth reprinting them. And one of them, Road to Karen, was redone as La Primogenita by Legion. Kim changed the design and republished. And the other two, Stamford Bridge and Hastings, are being redone by Legion right now.
Oh, so the games have a home.
So even the 3 games that we haven't done
are still out there.
Are still going to be out there. But yes, our business model is until a game really is selling very little per year, it's going to be available from Revolution Games.
Because I find that's a big frustration a lot of gamers have is they'll hear about a game, some buzz will come out about it, and then they'll realize, I didn't back it on the Kickstarter, and
especially
it's not even
if it's
out
a
there.
game series.
Yeah.
So you play another company's Civil War game, and then you go and look and see, wait a minute, the other 4 titles aren't available.
Absolutely.
I just got this one game, and so we really, with series games, don't want that to happen. So, now down the road, longer down the road, there'll come a point when a game is selling so little that
you'll have to
make the hard choice.
Yeah,
and it'll just
sort of.
But
we
haven't reached that point yet.
Right. Going back, so speaking of series games, the Perryville game, when is it going to be out? Because that will be the actual next one.
We have 2 games right now that are finished at the printer and going to be shipped to us, and that's Cry Havoc, the Perryville game. It's supposed to be to us about mid-June.
And it's still the standard 1 map size.
Standard 1 map. Yeah, it's very similar in size to the other Blind Sword games.
Right.
Very similar in size and play length to the other.
And that's this one you're working on here is with Steve Carey, who is the designer of the Perryville game.
The Perryville game is Jeff Grossman, most known for Cuba Libre for GMT.
Right. Great game. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a really, really good designer.
And what about Cry Havoc? What is it Cry Havoc? No.
Yeah.
Or something Havoc. Now I've said.
So I've been at a convention for a couple days, and I don't even know the title of my own game.
Not to worry. It's the new Perryville game. What's like every Blind Swords game has a little something twist to it. What's in that game that's going to interest Blind Sword junkies like myself?
So Perryville has got really messy command control, and it has brigade coordination rules that are similar to the Bull Run game. So when you activate a brigade, you're not able to move all the units adjacent to the enemy. So it makes your attacks more difficult to plan.
Right.
So Perryville is not, it's just different terrain, different units, a little different activation and command system.
And does that mean in general the activation numbers of the leaders are a little lower, or are you getting more limited and less full commands or full
They're
activations?
more limited, and the Union Army has a bunch of its troops not alerted that are slowly being released into the battle.
Right. So it's just like a trickle in as and then it builds up.
Right.
Well, that's cool.
And so there's that mechanism that, and you have to, and there's a little table of, depending on what you're doing, the Confederate player, depending on his level of aggression and what he does, he can cause the Union units to be released quicker.
Oh, you can
So
sort of trigger it.
it's not just random.
Right.
Both players have actions they can do that can speed up or retard the reaction.
Right. And it's going to be in one player's best interest to do it one way and the other one's...
Well, like there are trade-offs, though, also with... so like there are victory point locations that the Confederate player wants that are sitting under sleeping Union troops.
Right.
So
do you wake them up to get the victory points?
Do you prod the bear to get the victory points?
Right.
And at what point do you decide that's worthwhile?
Right, so if you can make it happen later where they have less time to react. Yeah, right.
Or you decide, no, I can do it and I can wreck a lot of his guys, and it won't be that bad a thing. So these are some of the kind of trade-offs.
I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
It's going to be great. So, and you said you had another game that's
Same time we're going to have Eagles in the Sky, the World War I air game that we've been working on. It's on the same boatload.
Right.
And it'll be mid-June also.
And I've seen the first look at that.
Yeah.
This is a big box of stuff.
4 pounds, 8 ounces. It's by far the biggest brick load of stuff that Revolution Games
This
has
is
ever made.
got to be your first 3-inch box,
Yeah, it's a 3-inch box.
and it's full.
Well, there's an insert in there to protect the cards.
Yeah, but
it's a lot of stuff.
yeah,
it's a-
the counters are gorgeous.
Yeah. So this game is designed by Michael Lemick, who did a lot of artwork over the last years for GMT. And so this is his design and his artwork.
And it's a World War I battle game, like a dogfight game.
It's a dogfight game with up to 6 aircraft on a side, but it's not hexes. It's card driven, but on a display. And the display shows relative range and position between 2 planes.
Right. So the display looks like it's showing different altitudes more than.
It's showing altitude and trailing.
Right. Right.
It's showing both things. And so the planes start not engaged at all with each other, and then there's rules about how a plane can intercept, and the 2 planes can become engaged. And once they become engaged, they fight on the display, and then if they become unengaged through maneuver, then they go back to the other section of the display.
Right.
So there's 2 levels of the display representing close dogfighting and just in the general vicinity. And it can be played as dogfights, or it can be played as campaign scenarios. And on a campaign scenario, you have to track damage to airplanes, pilot fatigue. You're working through the typical.
You kind of have a roster of.
We have rosters.
Yeah. And looking at the counter sheets, there's a ton of different World War I planes in there.
Yeah.
And how granular is the different, like from plane to plane? Is there, is it?
Medium level. I mean,
Right.
it's like planes are rated in for speed. They're rated for maneuverability. They're rated for critical damage. If they have something like, everybody knows that Newports were liable to shred their wings in a dive. So there's certain planes that have, depending on what you do, a critical weakness.
Right.
There's a few planes that are rated as extremely sturdy, so they are more damage.
Some can climb.
Some can climb. Some have special climbing or other abilities. Some are better in a dive. So they have, it's a pretty typical air game in terms of the fidelity of, the number of different things you can rate.
Right.
The difference compared to most games is it's a combination dogfight game and a combination campaign game at the same time. And they're historical campaigns in 1917 and 18 for sections of the front and nationalities.
So it focuses on the late war. So we're getting the best planes.
There is designed a 1919
so even farther
variant
Yeah.
if the first game does well. And of course we could always go back to 1915, 1916.
Yeah, because those planes are totally cool too.
If we want to. But right now it's 17 and 18.
Right, perfect. I noticed on the display too that it looks like it reminded me a bit of Wing Leader from GMT, where rather than a top-down look, you're looking at planes stacked up horizontally.
That's just for the altitude display.
That's all that does?
In reality, it's exactly the opposite of Lee's games.
Oh, okay.
So in World War II, with the much more powerful engines, combat was much more vertical, as his game shows.
Right, yeah.
In World War I, with the relatively light, well-maneuvering aircraft and weak engines, it's much more horizontal.
Maneuver.
So the dogfighting is mostly trying to get a favorable position upon your opponent's tail.
Right, try to tail him.
So
yeah.
that's in that way. It's the traditional dogfight game in that way.
There's been over the since the 70s. Since even before Richthofen's War. I think my very first game was Milton Bradley's Dogfight. Right, there's been a million World War I, but it feels like it's been quite a while since we've had a new one that we can. I'm always looking for the great hope of World War I games.
It seems to me like they're pretty regularly put out, but
but
it's a popular subject. Like I say, I think the main appeal will be you can manage more planes. You can manage quite a number of planes in a dogfight for like a half dozen planes. 2 hours.
Oh, great.
A reasonable time to finish. And if you want to do escorting bombers, recon missions, you want to play a campaign, that's where I think the game really shines. It allows, if you want to just pick up and play a dogfight, the game allows that. If you want to play a campaign and see what it was like to manage a squadron, it has that element too. And maybe sometimes you have a hard time. How many people are you going to send on this mission? My guys are tired. I don't have any, my planes are all shot up,
Right.
And so it has that element also. So I think that's the main draw there.
I remember a game from the 80s from TSR after all that had happened called Dawn Patrol that offered the same thing. The campaigns weren't quite as well crafted as this, but it did give you made rosters and you followed your pilots and it wasn't exactly a role playing, but it was sort of,
it was in between.
it was kind of in between. It was like, let's see how far I can take this pilot.
This is a little more simulation based but obviously it does have a little bit of that role playing aspect when you're tracking pilots, which you do, when you're tracking pilots and when you're tracking plane repair and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're going to get attached to some of the ones that last. Yeah, for sure. And this is, like I said, got the 3-inch boxes, a big deluxe package, mounted board, the whole works. Is this sort of like a trial balloon for Revolution to see like? It's definitely a step up in size of a package.
So the main reason we don't make bigger games is because they take too long to play. And if games don't get played, they don't get buzz.
Right.
And for a smaller company, we need people to play our product, not just buy it.
Right.
Now you reach a size like GMT or Multiman or whatever else. If somebody buys one of their big games and doesn't play it for a year, it's not a big deal.
Right.
But for us, it's changing now. I mean, this is like, we started selling games in 2012. This is our 12th year. But for a long time, if we weren't getting people playing our games and talking about it, sales were really weak.
Right.
And so our best-selling games are some of our smaller games. Our smaller, quicker-selling games, for many years, were the fast-selling games.
It does feel like, on both ends of the age spectrum of people in our hobby, it feels like young people coming in kind of want shorter games, and the graybeards are kind of. I had a guy say to me today. He said, "I thought when I was retired, that's when I was going to play all my monster games. I'm too old to play those monster games. I want a shorter game."
Yeah, there's definitely sales to be had in monster games, but for us, while building our name, we didn't think that a monster game was going to do it. Instead, if we have a smaller, faster playing game, so like when we did the first Blind Sword games, Stonewall's Sword, I took it to Constant World Expo. And at one time in that first year, I counted across all the tables, there were 7 copies of it being played. simultaneously. Now, when you get a game that you have many designers, many of the most hardcore players, and you got 7 games of it going, you've got some
something. Yeah,
you got some momentum.
Yeah.
Instead, if I'd had a monster game that year, maybe some people would have bought it, but would one person have even set it up there without planning? Probably not. It wouldn't have hit a table.
Well, but let's be clear. The game we're talking about, your new one, the Air game that's in the big box, is nothing like a monster game. It's a big box of stuff, but it still plays in a couple hours.
That's exactly. So there's the distinction.
Yeah.
If you told me that, hey, we're going to release Pacific War,
Right.
and I occasionally get a submission like that. Every once in a while, we get a submission that's way beyond what we could do. And, I'm not going to do Streets of Stalingrad.
Right.
Dana's a friend.
Yeah.
Great guy. I'm not going to do Streets of Stalingrad.
Right.
And it's mostly because of that reason. The second thing is, big games also take an enormous amount of time for the publisher. Now, most publishers, that doesn't bother them because everything is farmed out to teams. So you have a bunch of playtesters playing some game strewn across the country. It doesn't affect the publisher himself. He's not working on it. There's a designer, there's a developer, there's some playtesters. That's not Revolution Games.
Right.
With Revolution Games, every game goes through Richard and I, the 2 partners, and the 2 partners play the crap out of it.
Right.
So
there's nothing comes out of your door that you guys haven't pushed the counters around.
No. Nothing so far. So that means that we just can't do a game that is going to say, stop everything else you're doing, work on this the next 2 years.
Right.
And so, for most of our games, the primary developer is me. And the Air game has an outside developer.
And was that your first outside developer? Or?
And that is the first outside developer. I mean, he's actually the second person hired. The first person didn't work out. He's actually the second person hired for that game.
Right.
And even then, we were still heavily involved with it. It's not like it was on remote control.
Right. I'm sure from your point of view also, it's like, I can't suddenly not be involved.
Yeah, and so we know that we've talked about it. We suspect that the maximum we'll ever produce, would be 6 games in a year.
Right.
There'll never be a time when Revolution Games, with our current way we're set up, if sales went through the roof, we could hire all kinds of great employees,
You'd be a different kind of company.
It'd be a totally different kind of company.
Yeah.
The way we are set up right now, 6 games would mean that we'd have like a 2-month turnaround per game. And even that would take some of them being series games and things that were relatively fortuitous to knock out.
And it's not like even with that, a new game every 2 months, if that was your top speed, you're still talking, that's not like the game still has been in development for 18 months or 36 months or whatever it takes to get the thing into shape.
Yeah. I mean, we're just talking about
the finishing.
The time in between. Average game with Revolution from time of submission to publishing, probably 18 months. A little faster than some other companies.
Because
we're not doing a pre-order.
Yeah.
So we're
none of that Kickstarter stuff with all
pre-orders,
those
no
terrible
Kickstarters,
stretch goals.
So we just decide, Richard and I look over the submission, read the rules. Maybe if we really are on the fence, maybe make a test kit, push something around. Sometimes people send us that. I love that with submissions when people send me a playable copy or a vassal module.
Or a vassal module,
Either way, that's great.
How many submissions do you get a year, do you think?
So, very few. We've never been a company that gets a lot of submissions. Maybe a dozen.
And from unsolicited submissions, have you ever found a gem that you went, okay, we're going to publish this, or is it usually, hey, nice try, kid, go back to the drawing board?
We reject most of them.
Right.
And
That makes sense.
Yeah, and some of the ones we get submitted have been passed around a number of companies.
Right.
So, they were already went to GMT
And there's a good reason that they've been passed over.
and they didn't get picked up here. And so, but, there definitely are games that we've gotten submitted that we've published, Stonewall Sword being notable.
Fantastic game.
I got Stonewall Sword. I read the rules. I emailed Herman back and said, I'll buy it. And I'm lucky I did, because literally that afternoon he got 2 more offers for the game.
And he'd already said yes.
Of bigger companies, and he had said, I'm sorry, I've already sold it to Revolution.
Thank goodness Herman's a man of his word.
Yeah. So, and there's... So, we have had good outside submissions.
Right.
There's another submission. I can't think of the name that it came out. You'll kill me. But, so, Nuts Publishing in France. This War of Mine, the English Civil War game, was submitted to Revolution. I liked the game, but I told them we didn't have any way of producing the mounted map and the blocks at that time. We weren't using China. We were doing it in the United States, and those things are not available in the United States.
Right.
At all. I mean, just you can't do it. And so, so sometimes we get one that we
you like, but
we turned away, that we wouldn't fit us at the time. Now we could do it, but 3 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever I first saw it,
right,
couldn't do it.
Yeah, fair enough. You talked about when you first designed a game and you submitted it, and it was rejected. Do you think back to when you get like unsolicited stuff? Do you think about yourself back being on the other side of that
Yes.
transaction?
Yes. So a couple things I always do. One, unlike some of the people I sent submissions to, I always respond.
Right.
Number one. Number two, I try to be kind. I try to give feedback, if they want it, of the positives and negatives of the design.
Right.
Of both. So I do all of those things. Some designers want that and appreciate it. Some really don't want it. And so Richard Berg sent me several games, and I politely rejected one. And he wrote me a very nasty response saying, I demand to know why I rejected it. And so I hadn't wanted to do it, but I said, okay, here's everything that's wrong with the design. And no, Richard didn't send me any more games.
May he rest in peace.
Yeah.
He's definitely a favorite. I know he's a cantankerous man, but God bless grumpy old man. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm working on that myself. Every year I get a little grumpier.
So yeah, I do think about the response to.
Yeah.
There's no reason to, if you can avoid it, and just make it professional. And a lot of times, you tell people, look, there might not be anything wrong with your game, but we're not the right people.
Right.
To do
it's not just the quality of the game, but the fit of the game then.
It's the fit of the game. And it can be, I look at my customers and go, GMT, for example, has a ton more customers who would be willing to play Dominant Species Marine or 1857 or whatever else. The GMT has built up a crossover audience. If Revolution releases a crossover title, and I'm not saying we'll never do it, we're going to be very aware that at first we're going to be starting from zero.
Right. Because you've got basically a military simulation audience, and that's
it.
That's it. Yeah. And like I don't play a lot of crossover games at all, but then I have buddies who I wargame with that are sort of 50-50, and you really don't know how many of your customers are 50-50 and how many of them are old grognards? Have you got many submissions that were more of a hobby game or family game or whatever?
A couple, and when we were, and we've played a few before. It's really hard for us, since we're not big Eurogame players. It's really hard for us to evaluate one of those.
Right.
I'm not even enough in that world, so I play it, and I played one game, and I looked at it and I said, "This is a sure thing." And another big publisher picked it up like I thought they would.
Right.
And I play tested. I play tested the Search for Planet X, which is a social deduction game.
Right.
Which I stink at. And I was able to give them no particularly good feedback other than it's a really good game and you'll do well with it.
I play so few of those games that if I was in your shoes and somebody brought me one, I would have no idea if they'd completely ripped off another game.
Right.
Whereas in the space we live in,
you'd recognize
you'd recognize it right away. Yeah. So thinking about the future of Revolution, this latest game, first time with a outside developer, bigger box but still decent playing time. Is there any sort of, it's going to have to cost more. Your production costs are going to be more. Is there much riding on the success of that game, or how does it? Do you feel really nervous letting it out of the gate?
No.
Right. You have faith in the game, obviously.
It's not just that. It's the business model. I lost money on my first game in '92. I've never done it again.
Right. So everything's been.
So I just don't think at this point, cross my fingers, I don't think at this point that anything that we've worked hard on is going to be such a bomb that you're going to have that failure.
Right.
Now, we may not make a lot of money on it, and that's basic to our belief. That's why we don't have a P500 or anything else. Pretty much everybody else in this business wants to match up the money they have on day one to cover their production costs. That's
right.
So there's absolutely no risk, whether you're using Kickstarter or pre-order.
Yeah.
There's zero risk. You may not make any money, but there's zero risk to you because you're not putting any capital up.
Right.
Whether you're
they're using the money from the customers to make the game.
To make the game. That's the model that pretty much the game industry works on. We looked at that from the beginning and said, okay, we know how much the game costs to make, so let's take a typical Civil War game. We know that as long as we can sell 600 or so of that, it's going to pay the bills, pay the designer, pay the artist, pay the production, all the bills.
Right. And
we're confident that we can sell 600 easily of any of those games because they have quality. So I don't need pre-orders to watch that. And I've had other publishers tell me, it's like one publisher told me his games go like this. For every 7 games he sells, 3 games he loses money on, 3 games he breaks even on, 1 game's a big hit.
I guess that's a business model.
That's sort of like the movies.
Yeah,
that would be how the movie industry would go. Books would say that.
Yeah.
It's not Revolution Games.
Right.
We are pretty darn stable. Our best seller to our lower sellers do not have some tenfold difference.
Well, and you must have, like, when I think of a game like Cells, like one of the earlier games that I got from you guys, that it was like, I gotta put Revolution on my list now because this is such a great game. That game must still sell. Cells must still sell.
It sells about 300 a year.
Right, which is pretty good numbers for a game that's a decade or so
it's
old.
20, yeah, it's more than a decade
right.
old. Yeah, so so it's selling, like I say, it's selling 300 a year. At this point, if it's career. And so that makes, some of our games are down, some of our oldest games, like Washington's Crossing, 2012 game, not as popular. It's at the end of its sales lifespan. It's been bumping around at like 50 to 100 sales a year.
Right.
But
That still feels like a number.
it's still passive revenue that was, paid for years ago.
And given your business model, you must rely on, like, what's your percentage of, in a given year, sales for new releases versus catalog sales?
About 50-50.
That's fantastic. That's got to be a big part of what the success is, having a back catalog that sells as half of your revenue.
It is. And that's one reason why you'll never hear us talking about like cash flow or like you said, this game is going to sink us.
Right.
But we're set up that we could pay for all the games this year. They could all sell poorly, and we'd still be in business next year producing 5 new games.
Right,
It's
right.
not. We're just not set up that way.
Right. You've got to. You're not like the guy that with 3 flops, 3 break even, and 1
Right.
hit.
So like.
Because if he doesn't get the hit,
Exactly.
he's screwed.
So like the same guy told me after knowing me for a number of years, he goes, Roger, he says, I'm all about cash flow. He says, you never talk about cash flow. He says, you're all about profit. I go,
Right.
correct.
Right. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Because when my other businesses, when I was managing other businesses, I always said, if you manage profit year after year, you'll get to the point where you don't have to worry about cash flow.
And that's where you are now.
Right.
Right.
So we have the reserves of cash in the bank that if we want to produce, 3 games simultaneously, 2,000 to 3,000 copies of each one, without a single pre-order, it's not gonna. We can write the check and just move on.
Right.
And so it's a different business model. If we were wrong, if Richard and I chose bad mistake after bad mistake in terms of titles, yeah, it could. It would have to be a sustained.
Just a sustained run of bad luck or bad choices.
A lot of bad choices
Right,
in a row.
right.
Because you have to, because we have that back catalog.
So,
Fueling us.
2012 was your first. That was Washington's Crossing, the first.
Washington Crossing and Cells were 2012.
Right.
Those 2 games were 2012.
So you're 13 years, 12,
Whatever
it is. You're 11
This
years
is the
in.
12th year.
This is the 12th year.
12th.
And you've obviously grown in that time. What do you have any sort of like dreams for what the next 5 or 10 years is going to look like?
We always run a 5-year
Right.
projection of where we'll be in terms of production, sales per unit, profit. Yeah, we always run a 5-year
Right.
plan.
And you don't strike me as like the plan is going to be extravagant and risky.
No, our whole plans are pretty conservative.
Right. Right.
Yeah. The only unconservative thing we did was at the beginning, because of course you have no revenue, and you have to produce the first couple games.
You got to come up with some money to start.
just with capital.
Yeah.
And so we just, it was our own cash,
Right.
and so that was the only time when there was, the first couple of years were a little bit, tighter.
Right. Right.
But
So what do you think? What do you think you'll be doing in 5 years? Like, what will Revolution look like then?
Well, we hope in 5 years that we can put out 6 games a year. We would hope at that point that our print runs per title would be consistently 3,000, 4,000. In
Right.
other words, that would be equivalent to GMT and everything at that point.
Yeah.
So those are kind of goals that we could set, so that one of our titles would just be a normal war game release of any of the big publishers. Right now, we're no longer a super small publisher,
No.
but we're just above that. We're still a small.
Right.
We're still a small company.
There's a two or three sort of big boys, but then you feel like you're in that tier that's got companies like Legion and whatnot that are.
So yeah, Legion's about the same size as ours. And I haven't compared. I mean, I know some people. I don't know, for example, how we would compare exactly with like Worthington or Lock and Load or whatever else.
Right, Flying Pig.
Flying Pig. But
you feel very but Legion seems to like a really good comparable. It's like the design, the production quality, and
Randy at Legion's a good friend, and yes, they're a close analog of ours. Like I say, I don't know enough about some of the other smaller companies to say, but yeah, we may not even be second tier, we may be third tier, but down that way, but we're above but we are doing regular production of real runs. We're not print and play, we're not laser cutting our counters, we're not running runs of 1,000 anymore.
Right.
You know, you can buy our games in Japanese and Chinese. And
what's the overseas market like for Revolution? I mean, there's a lot of strange places that buy war games.
Yeah, I got an order from Thailand today. So a customer from Hungary ordered a game which he wanted delivered to a beach resort in Thailand. That's when you know you're
you're out there.
A real company.
Yeah.
So so for example, in China, the air game that we just produced here, we ran 2,000 of, and we don't know whether that's enough. The Chinese want to for U.S.
For U.S.
And the Chinese want to run 700 to 800 for their market. And so.
And when you're selling into China, where there's no sort of reciprocal copyright agreements, how does that work?
So you're licensing them, and years ago they would have just copied your stuff and not paid you anything. But the Wild West days have really decreased. They prefer original artwork and to look closer to the game rather than be a bad knockoff.
Right.
So at the level of war games, only 700, 800, 1,000, they're willing to pay, not a huge price, but they're willing to pay to
so they're licensing the real thing rather than just saying, hey.
Now, if they thought it was some pandemic game that they could sell 200,000 of a knockoff, they don't usually pay those people.
Right.
Because the rewards for not paying for the design are so high. On the war game, they look at the relatively small numbers and the relatively small money, and they say, okay, fine, well.
Right. So you're selling into China, obviously, because you're going to get 700 or 800 of the air game in the Chinese market. Right. Well, it sounds like everything's coming up roses for you.
The last couple of years have been more difficult production-wise. Right now is good, but last year was a nightmare. The year before that was a nightmare.
Because of the supply chain issues that were...
Because of the supply chain issues.
Right. And it just took that long to...
So, for example, our printers in the United States, which we were using, could not get paper. If they could get paper, it was so much more expensive than it was before. So, one of our Blind Sword Civil War games went up $15,000. And you can't pass that cost. You can't double your production costs and say, hey, a game that was $75 is now $150. There are some companies who are close to trying it right now, but it makes their games really expensive. So we contracted with a company that makes a lot of Euro games, They gave us a good price. They couldn't do the quality. We had to do a lot of component reruns at great cost. So last year we had 2 games that had a lot of rework done on them, and 1 game that was done perfectly by our American publishing team, but was really expensive. And so, yeah, everything's great this year, but you didn't ask me last year.
Right. Yeah.
Last year was, frustrating to say the least.
Right.
And the
So
year
you're feeling that you're coming out of it.
Yeah, and the year before that, a lot of our other companies were having it. Like, since we were producing in China, normally a container from China costs like $2,000 to $3,000 to ship across.
To ship it, yeah.
At the height of the pandemic, they were paying $18,000 to $20,000 for a container.
Oh my God.
So Tony Curtis, the production manager at GMT, goes, "Here's, don't think it's cheaper in China. Right now, you're cheaper.
Right.
In the United States than I am in
yeah.
China, but that's the exception over most of the time."
Right.
But after that experience where the American production went up so much, tried the other company, and they couldn't do it, we shifted printers again. And so now, like everybody else, well, not everybody else, Multiman still produces in the US using several of the same suppliers we were using. But our game is produced in China the same way.
Right.
It produced the same printers as GMT. So,
And the latest one looks beautiful. So
and
it's
they can do good work,
Yeah.
and they are. And so we think we've got the quality control issue down. We've had 3 games with them now, and they seem to have good communication, good quality control. The price is way above what China used to be, but it's still
less than the U.S.
less than the U.S. price. So we can hold our prices rather than
Right.
increasing them.
So to wrap up, I know that we know what you've got coming out now. We know what's coming down the pike in Blind Swords. What else is just off in the distance that we're going to see sort of after these next couple of games get produced?
I told Gene I would never answer this
Oh,
question.
well, that's,
So
don't be
I'll
pressure you.
cheat and explain why a little bit. A lot of game projects never come to the finish line. And so if you tell something, the Cells game is our best-selling game. Gazala uses the same rules. I have a submission for a 3rd game using those rules. I've wanted one for years.
I'm in.
Wanted one for years. It's an experienced designer. It's an East Front subject. But will it reach the finish line? I haven't heard from him in months.
Right.
I evaluated the game. I told him to do some things to it. He sent it back out for more play testing. I don't know if that game will ever get done. So that's as most I'll say about it. There's another game that might get done.
That's fair enough. I mean,
Herman-
why break people's hearts?
Exactly. Herman likes to talk about things, so he's already announced that he's going to do the Battle of Leipzig with a variation of the blind sword system for Napoleonics.
So, but not his new Black Swan
It's not going to
system.
be Black Swan. It's not going to be Black Swan. It's not going to be exactly blind swords. Richard, my business partner, and Herman, Richard had been working on a game, Napoleonic, and Richard and Herman compared where their beginning notes were, and there was a lot of crossover between their ideas. So it's in the early days. It's going to be brigade or division level. I mean, it's going to be way up. Because
Right.
Leipzig's got 600,000 Minnesota. So it's going to be some combination of activation and events, but it's going to be bigger hexes, bigger units, and it's going to be its own unique thing. So that is a definite. It's going to. But what if Herman and Richard work on it, and Herman comes up with ideas, and we give our feedback, and we decide it never worked out.
There's lots of stories of games like that, right? Where it seemed like it was going to be a winner, and then you just get to a point in playtesting where a certain nut can't be cracked, and it's just not there.
Right. And so, I I hesitate to talk about those games because they're, you know, they may or may not come in. But there is a Leipzig game, there is a Cells style game. Those two games are definitely in there. There's a submission for a World War II tactical game, but we've evaluated several of those over the years and rejected several.
It's a crowded field.
It is, but we do have a World War II tactical game that that we could, you know, that is potential that could still ultimately show up as a Revolution game someday.
I mean, I like tactical games. I'd be into it. It's a crowded field, but I seem to buy every one that comes out.
Ted Racer's working on another game for us, but we agreed on a game. He tried it. It didn't work. We canned that one, and he's working on the next one. So it's like, okay, yeah, Ted's working on a game that will be roughly in the dark system for GMT, the deadly system for Revolution games.
Right. Yeah.
But not going to talk about subject, not going to talk about ETA. But
It's down the pike.
it's out there.
Yeah.
But you know, that would be another game that is, you know, down the road.
That's fantastic. Herman Lutman, Ted Racer.
Yeah, Herman and Ted are definitely working on games, and there's a couple other designers who have said they want to submit things, but I haven't even seen.
Right, you got to see it. Yeah.
I haven't even seen the submission.
Right.
But they're both, you know, known designers for other companies.
Right. That say, I got this idea, it might be right for you.
Right.
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 Well, I can't wait to see it. Thanks so much, Roger. This is,
Okay.
this has been very good.
Thank you, Grant.
All right, thank you.
All right. Roger was great. Very upfront about print runs and the Revolution business plan. And he even gave us a few sneak peeks into upcoming games and designers. So lots to look forward to from Revolution Games. All right. Now for a look at a game. This time a classic, a revolutionary game. As longtime listeners know, I'm a big fan of Courtney Allen and the Area Impulse system. So it was with some surprise when I was listening to Ardwolf, the popular YouTuber, talk about the best of Avalon Hill and about games that changed wargaming, and he didn't have much to say about Storm over Arnhem. He did say he knew of it, he knew it was important, but he'd never played an Area Impulse game. I'm a big fan of Gary and his channel, but I gotta say, this was shocking to hear. What the hell? Never played an Area Impulse game? On top of that, in trying to describe it a bit, he mostly referenced the area movement map, which is not really the novel thing about that system. So I wondered, maybe there's other folks out there that missed the boat on Courtney Allen's innovation. I thought I'd try to rectify that a little. Storm over Arnhem came out in 1981 and won the 1982 Charles S. Roberts Award for Best 20th Century Game. So what was so special about it? Well, I think you need to put that in a bit of perspective. It's the end of the 70s, early 80s. We're well past the age of the Avalon Hill classics like Bulge and Africa Corps. SPI and Avalon Hill are trying to outdo each other. Games are getting bigger, longer, and more complex, all in the name of that phantom realism, whatever that means. And then along comes this game from Avalon Hill that goes in the other direction. Courtney Allen's Storm over Arnhem is meant to be more streamlined, less time-consuming, and more engaging than a lot of what's on offer. And that more engaging part is very important. There are a lot of games then that were still in the classic I go, you go mode, where you could wait half an hour and before it was your turn to take your turn. The key thing about this new Area Impulse system was it was completely back and forth, no waiting. And while wargaming has had area movement as far back as Diplomacy or Risk, this was slightly new in that different units have different movement allowances. So it's area movement, but not just single area movement. So the armored cars and the tanks can scoot around the board more quickly than the infantry units. A basic term of Storm over Arnhem goes something like this. I activate one area of the map, and I can move or fire with all the units there. And then after they've moved or fired, they're flipped over to their spent side. And then you get to activate an area and move or fire all of your fresh units in that area. We go back and forth like this until neither of us have any fresh units left or we pass. And then in the areas where we both have units, we resolve close combat. And then it's the next turn. There might be a few reinforcements. We flip all the units back to fresh and start again. And that's it. That's the game in a nutshell. I think what grabbed players when the game came out was a combination of both players being constantly engaged with this back and forth impulse system and the reasonable playtime. As well, the mechanics in this game are very straightforward. In this game, the scale is squads for the infantry and individual vehicles for the AFVs and the reconnaissance units. As well, there's a few HQ units used mainly to call in artillery. Most of the infantry come in 3 squad stacks, and if you can keep them together with attack when you're attacking, you'll get a little bonus for unit cohesion. Movement is simple. Infantry might have a movement allowance of 4 or 5, while AFVs are more like 7, and the armored cars or reconnaissance units maybe 10. Of course, given the situation, only the Germans have AFVs, but the Brits do have a couple of anti-tank guns. Anyway, back to movement. You pay 1 movement point to move into an adjacent area, or 2 if there's an enemy unit adjacent to that adjacent area. You pay 3 movement points to move into an enemy-occupied area at night, and 4 movement points to move into an enemy-occupied area in the daytime. So very, very straightforward and simple movement rules. There's no terrain effects modifiers or anything like that. Combat is likewise very straightforward. The attacker designates one of their units as the lead attacker. The attack value is that unit's attack factor, and then you add one more for each extra attacking unit that you're attacking with, and also a bonus of 1 more if you have at least 3 attacking units that are from the same platoon. So this gives you the attack total. The attacker's attack value, and then +1 for each extra unit, and +1 if you have that unit cohesion. The defense value is the total of the lowest face-up defense factor that's defending, +1 if the attack is coming from an adjacent area in daytime, or +2 if the attack is coming from an adjacent area at night. And then that gives you the defense total. Both players roll 2 dice each, and they add the sum of their dice to either their attack or the defense total. If the attacker's total is equal or less than the defender's total, then there's no effect. The attacker's units are all flipped to their spent side, and that's that. But if the attacker's total is greater than the defender's total, you subtract the defender's total from the attacker's, and the remainder is the number of casualty points that the defender will have to satisfy. Eliminating a unit is worth 3 casualty points. Retreating a unit is worth 1 casualty point. Eliminating an armor unit is worth 4 points. It's interesting to note that the attacker gets extra attack value from adding units to the attack, while the defender only gets to use the worst defending unit and gets no help from extra units directly. But of course, having extra defending units that can be retreated rather than eliminated is a big help. So going back to this basic area impulse idea, one side activates an area and moves or fires with some or all of their units. Those are now spent. Then the other side activates an area and moves or fires all of their units there. Those are now spent, and you go back and forth until both either pass or have no more fresh units to activate. Then it's the close combat phase for any units in contested areas. Again, it's another simple system, albeit a fair bit bloodier than regular combat. And if one side has more units than the other, that's a definite advantage in close combat for sure. And then that's the end of the turn. You move the turn marker, start with the next turn with a random event, which may bring on a few reinforcements for the German and some reformed units from the British casualties. All units are flipped back up to the fresh side, and you do it again. There's 8 turns in the game. Victory is achieved for the Germans by occupying certain areas worth victory points, and by the British for denying access to those areas. It's very straightforward, it's fun, it's playable in an evening. There was also I think it came out in the General magazine. There was also an extended game. I think it maybe added like 2 turns to the beginning of the game rather than at the end of the game. It was called The Crossing, and you could Yeah, I think it came in the General Magazine. You can find references to it online at BGG. You can probably even find out printouts for it. But the basic game is just 8 turns. I think the extended game goes 10 or 11 turns. Anyway, like I said, straightforward, playable, and eating, very fun. And it spawned a raft of successors. The first few of these successors all came from Avalon Hill. Thunder at Casino was next, and then another breakthrough with Don Greenwood's Turning Point Stalingrad. It introduced a couple of new interesting twists. The big one was something called the Sunset Roll. No longer can you count on using every unit every turn. There's an impulse marker that goes up every time one of the two players or both players have played an impulse, have activated an area. If the first German dice roll on their turn is equal or less than the impulse marker, the turn ends on that impulse, and we go on to the next turn. So you do well to get all your most important moves or attacks done early, because you never know when the turn's going to end. As well, the game introduced variable delays to when engaged units could be activated again. A unit that gets mauled might not be able to be activated for 2 or 3 more turns. This game was a huge success and led to one final title from Avalon Hill, Breakout Normandy. Well, it didn't have any groundbreaking new ideas over Turning Point Stalingrad. It was also a huge success, and it's still played at board game conventions today. I should also mention that scale changes from game to game in these early area impulse games from Avalon Hill. While Storm over Arnhem uses squads and Thunder at Casino uses platoons, Turning Point Stalingrad uses battalions, and Breakout Normandy uses regiments. Some players prefer the smaller, more tactical, earlier scales and don't like the way the system works at the more operational scale. But given the success of those later games, I think such quibbles are sort of in the minority. Post-Avalon Hill, the system's been adapted many times. The first one I remember was Storm over Stalingrad from MMP. But ATO magazine has published several area impulse games set in the American Civil War, and Revolution Games has published several more World War II games from Mike Ranella, all roughly the same size or smaller than the original Storm over Arnhem. Ranella has probably done more to keep area impulse going than anyone else. Some of the Civil War titles from ATO are his, and then on top of the smaller games from Revolution, he self-published Stalingrad Verdun on the Volga, which is very much inspired by Turning Point Stalingrad, but adds some new innovative mechanics as well. And then his Monty's Gamble from MMP is a full-size take on Market Garden and has had a second edition, so obviously sold well. So Area Impulse has had a long and thriving history. It's also interesting to note that Avalon Hill didn't exactly know what to do with Storm over Arnhem originally. As I recall it, the first version came in a typical Avalon Hill box. I have one of those, the bookshelf style. But then they later printed a version called a folio. It was a Ziploc. It had a paper map instead of a mounted one. And so I got the feeling that maybe they were trying to price it at a lower price point and make it sort of a smaller, more intro game or something like that. But the weird thing was with the folio game as well, there was no dice included. I guess they were leery of putting out a game that didn't have absolutely everything in it that you needed to play. I don't know. It's weird. It should have been fine. Everyone has some dice. But Avalon Hill made the strange decision to include numbered chits instead of dice. And worse, I think those chits were base 10 rather than a 2-dice-6 system. So certain rules sections of the rule book had to be rewritten for the different numbers. It was a stupid move, really, if you ask me. But the one good thing about the folio, though, was the rule book was a bit longer. It had a longer historical piece in it that didn't come in the original rule book in the box version. Anyway, so Storm over Arnhem was a groundbreaking game in its time, and one that has spawned a long line of successors and spin-offs, much like Mark Herman's We the People launched card-driven games. I've read that Ardwolf, as I mentioned earlier, finally found a copy of Storm over Arnhem on the resale market and ordered it. I certainly hope he likes it, and I hope he places it in its historical context to imagine what a sensation it made in its time. there's a lot of call for shorter, easier games these days, both from folks wanting to get into the hobby for the first time, but also from graybeards who don't have the stamina to play the big games anymore. I think Storm over Arnhem and its many follow-ups fit the bill. So if you haven't tried an area impulse game, Storm over Arnhem is a great place to start. Failing that, I would check out any of Mike Ranella's games from Revolution Games. They're simple, they're playable in an evening. Highly recommended. Okay, bouquets. Well, this is an interesting one. The issue of compensation for reviews has come up again in the video game world, where a reviewer was caught asking a producer for $7,500 to change its negative review to positive before publishing it. Of course, that's video games, a much more lucrative market, but it got one board game content creator thinking. Board Game Dojo posted an excellent episode called The Psychology of Sponsored Content. I'll link to it in the notes. It really lays out the situation, and it has helped me think more deeply on this issue. Most of the games I review or talk about, I've paid for, but I have been offered a few review copies for free, and one company even sent me some unsolicited games. I think my policy is I'm going to be upfront about when a game was provided by a producer, and just let the audience make up their own minds about whether that influences me. It just makes sense to me to do it that way. It's funny, when I was younger, I worked for years in record stores. We'd get free copies to play in the store all the time, but it never influenced how we spoke about any of that music. If we got in the new Madonna album, it didn't make us like it more than whatever rock and roll we were playing. That's for sure. As well, music reviewers and book reviewers have always received promotional copies. And while free games might sound like a bonanza, it's actually pretty small compensation for the time and money spent by podcasters and YouTubers just on their hosting and their equipment. But, let me know what you think. It certainly doesn't, it's not going to change the way I do anything when I get a few free games now and then. Parting shots. Well, no real parting shots again this time, but I was thinking about the dude who tried to extort $7,500 for a positive video game review. That industry is massive. It generates more money than movies, I think. I'm struck that the 7,500 beans is such a paltry sum. I think the extorter was an idiot for asking for so little if he was going to try extortion. And then I think the publisher might have got a real bang for its buck if they just paid. I mean, I'm glad they didn't, of course, but what small potatoes to pay in a billion-dollar industry? Anyway, that's it for another episode of Pushing Cardboard. Please tell your pals, spread the word. That's the only real way to get more people to know about the podcast. And drop by the website or the Discord server. The website will sometimes have articles that don't fit the podcast format. There's polls, there's ways to interact with the rest of Pushing Cardboard's content. And then there's always someone around on the Discord server. And we just talk about games mostly. Sometimes we band together, start up a game online. I'm getting killed at Power Grid at the moment, which probably serves me right for trying a non-war game. But do drop by. It's always great to hear from you, and even greater to chat. Thanks for listening. If you're the type to give ratings on iTunes, please rate and comment on the podcast. They tell me it helps us find new folks, or new folks find us. I don't think that's really true, but it might help folks understand what the show is all about. Until next time, happy Father's Day.